Hey everyone, Snowfunny Pyretano here, the internet's laziest politics nerd. It's too hot. Anyway, today I'm going to review the brand new ideology from thinker and philosopher Karl Marx. Karl and his friends, they're into some radical parties. So the reason I want to make this video is that on the internet there's a lot of misunderstanding around Marxism, communism, socialism and anarchism. And while I'm not an expert in any of these ideologies, I do have some knowledge about them. So I do want to share that knowledge in order to help clear up some misunderstandings. Now it's important to be aware of the fact that there is no single accepted definition of any of these words. Even a lot of socialists disagree on what socialism actually is. If you look at the Socialism 101 subreddit, you will see that they will make statements that contradict the socialism101.com website. So what I will be doing here is I will try to be using the sort of broader categories, the more broader definition of socialism, the broader definition of anarchism, and try to clear up some misunderstanding there. And there are going to be people who will disagree with my definitions. Some of them are probably going to be really angry and shout abuse at me, because that's just how politics on the internet work. But hopefully some of you will also find it useful. And I am bound to make mistakes and say things that are wrong here, so please point out in the comments if you see a mistake. And to other people who have a very basic understanding of these ideologies, I understand that many people may be reluctant to speak about them, because if you have some knowledge, you're probably also aware of how ignorant you are. But if this stops you from speaking about these ideologies, the consequence is often that people at the very bottom of the Dunning-Kruger scale, who know absolutely nothing about these ideologies but who are very confident in their understanding of them, may end up spreading misinformation. So I want to start off by talking about Marxism, where all of this sort of starts. So Marxism in itself is not an ideology, but a sort of framework of analyzing society through the lens of class struggle. So a central idea in Marxism is the fact that different classes have different interests. If you work in a factory, then your boss makes money off of your work. Whatever you make in that factory, the factory will get a profit from, and some of that profit ends up in the pocket of your boss. Your boss can increase his profit by, among other things, decreasing your wage, which is something that you don't want, of course. You as a worker probably want the full pay of your work. You want the full fruits of your labor. But the higher paid you get, the less money your boss gets. In fact, if you get paid the full value of your work, then the boss won't have any way to get an income. And in this way, the interests of you and your boss are opposed. The work that you do ends up putting money in the pockets of your boss. They're profiting off of your labor. And Marxists consider this a form of theft. So the alternatives that were proposed by Marx were socialism and communism. So let us get into what that actually means. So the most basic definition of capitalism is that it's a system where there is private ownership of the means of production. Socialism is a system where there is a public ownership of the means of production. So under capitalism, it is bosses that own factories, bosses that own businesses, and therefore they own the means of production. While under socialism, it is the workers themselves that own the businesses that they work in. And that is the most basic definition of socialism. Within socialism, you can find many other categories. There are market forms of socialism, there are non-market forms. Some socialists believe in the concept of money, some socialists want to get rid of money completely, which is why I think this quote from Margaret Thatcher, where she says that the problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money, is kind of stupid. I mean, it's catchy, but it doesn't really capture what socialism is about. And especially if the entire goal of your brand of socialism is to get rid of money, then yeah, you're going to run out of other people's money. It's sort of the point. And it's also the fact that nations don't typically just run out of money. Economics is more complicated than that. So that is the basic definition of socialism. The basic definition of communism is that it's a stateless, classless and moneyless society. And you may be thinking that well, this doesn't sound like the Soviet Union at all, and you'd be correct about that. So what happened in the Soviet Union was that people tried to create communism through an ideology known as Marxism-Leninism, named after Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, of course. Under Marxist-Leninism, what you do is you establish a revolutionary vanguard party. That vanguard party spearheads a revolution that leads to a working class dictatorship. And this working class dictatorship sits at the top, overseeing the transition from capitalism to communism. When communism has been achieved, the dictatorship is supposed to dissolve itself and you get a classless society. The period in between is known as socialism. So already here we see a slightly different definition of the term socialism. So the common ownership of the means of production is still there, but there are some other features as well, including the end goal of communism. And now, of course, the Soviet Union never achieved this, and no country in the world has ever achieved this, which is why a lot of communists will say that real communism has never been tried. So the end goal of communism is actually a libertarian one, and this explains why ideologies like Anarcho-Communist exist. I've noticed that many people have been sort of accused by the term Anarcho-Communist because they think that anarchism and communism are completely opposed and therefore the term doesn't make sense. Steve Crowder made this claim in his video, Socialism is Evil.
I know now they're teaching in school Anarcho-Communism. Have you heard of this? It seems redundant, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I know. People told me I was the idiot because I was like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's totally stupid.
Look, we found common ground.
Yeah.
Now, if you think of communism as a totalitarian ideology where the state owns and controls everything, then of course anarcho-communism becomes contradictory. But if you see the end goal of communism as being this stateless, classless and moneyless society, then anarcho-communism makes sense. Anarcho-communists is simply communists who want to achieve communism through very libertarian means without creating any sort of dictatorship. So to expand on anarchism, anarchism is, I would say, even more loosely defined than socialism, in the sense that anarchism is a series of ideologies that are critical to authority and that are opposed to all forms of coercive hierarchy. And most anarchists want flat structure and so on. And the way that Crowder talks about it is that anarchism is a far-right ideology.
Well, sorry. My right, your left. Here's anarchy. Here's communism. Here's free enterprise. Here'd be socialism, and here'd be kind of the middle.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
agree.
like,
I just want to make sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Because like a utopian capitalist economy is anarchy.
And to me this is a very weird statement. The most famous anarchist in the United States is Noam Chomsky, and Noam Chomsky is definitely not pro-capitalist. He is very anti-capitalist. And the biggest figures within anarchism, Kropotkin, Proudhon, Bakunin, they were all socialist. So what Crowder and this kid is talking about is anarcho-capitalism. But the thing is that anarcho-capitalism is an outlier when it comes to anarchism. It's very different from other forms of anarchism that, as I've said, are anti-capitalist and socialist. And a lot of anarchists don't really consider anarcho-capitalism to be a real form of anarchism. In fact, Murray Rothbard, the founder of anarcho-capitalism, even wrote an essay called Are Libertarians Anarchists?, where he talks about this sort of problematic use of the word anarchist and says that it's not actually based on historical definitions of the word. I'm going to read out a part of this essay, the very end of it. We must conclude that the question, are libertarians anarchists, simply cannot be answered on etymological grounds. The vagueness of the term itself is such that the libertarian system would be considered anarchist by some people and anarchist by others. We must therefore turn to history for enlightenment. Here we find that none of the proclaimed anarchist groups correspond to the libertarian position, that even the best of them have unrealistic and socialistic elements in their doctrine. I'm gonna jump ahead. We must therefore conclude that we are not anarchists, and that those who call us anarchists are not on firm etymological ground and are being completely unhistorical. He then goes on to proposed that maybe they should call themselves non-anarchists instead. So my personal preference is that if somebody is an anarcho-capitalist, they call themselves an anarcho-capitalist. Because when somebody uses the term anarchist, I will assume they're talking about the socialist forms of anarchism, and so will a lot of other anarchists. So I think it just clears up confusion if people who are ANCAP refer to themselves as ANCAP instead of just blanket anarchist. No, so most forms of anarchism would be on the far left, but there are some forms of anarchism, except from ANCAP, that I would consider to be sort of center. One of them is mutualism, which is a system proposed by Proudhon. And mutualism is a form of free market socialism. Now you may hear this and think that free market socialism is an oxymoron because socialists are opposed to the free market. And that's not necessarily true. So my understanding of mutualism is that it still has this common ownership of the means of production in the sense that the workers still own the factories that they work in. But they sell products on an open market where the value of the product is based on the value of the labor they put into it. And they can exchange that product for products, money, and services of equal labor value. So it has a market where products are openly traded, so it's a free market, but you also have common ownership of the means of production. Therefore, it satisfies the requirements of being called socialist while also satisfying the requirements of being called a free market. And I imagine this is probably one of the things where a lot of people will fight me in the comment section and tell me that I'm wrong. And probably am. Mutualism is not my field. And I'm sure some people will object and say that, but can you really trade things on a market when there is no private property? And I would say, well, yeah. In order to understand this, you need to understand what Marxists define as private property. Because to a Marxist, there is a difference between private property and personal property. So private property is property where you can earn money off of others, to put it simply. If you're a landlord and you own apartments where you make money off of your tenants, then that is private property. The people that live in these apartments are giving you money to live there. The same if you're a private business owner. If you own a factory, you make money off of the workers in that factory, and therefore it is private property. However, Marxists also recognize something called personal property. Personal property is things that you own and that you use. So your toothbrush, your bike, the house that you live in, the garden where you grow food. And when Marxists talk about getting rid of private property, they're not talking about getting rid of these things. They're simply talking about getting rid of property where it's possible to earn a profit off of somebody else. And this brings us back to a question that I sometimes see capitalists ask, which is, what is your fair share of somebody else's work? Which is a question that can just as easily be used to criticize capitalism. Why should somebody else profit off of the labor that you do, including your boss? No, these are political and economic theories that are very complex. And I've tried to just lay out the groundwork, not explain how these things are supposed to work in praxis, but explain the basic ideas. More precisely, what kind of values do anarchists have? What kind of values do socialists have? What do people actually mean when they call themselves a Marxist? If you want to learn more about socialism, I do recommend the website socialism101.com. It has a broader, more basic definition of socialism than the subreddit by the same name, which I personally consider to be a bit dogmatic. And it just seems like an easier and friendlier place to actually learn about socialism. Reddit and the internet in general is usually not a good place to learn about ideology. You can find a lot of good articles, but if you go into groups where these things are discussed, you often find a lot of people who are very, dogmatic, very angry, very assured of their own knowledge. I mean, just ask yourself, what kind of person does want to hang out on the internet and talk about ideology all day long? It's like, obviously they're not going to be healthy people. So I hope this helped explain some things. Thank you for watching. And please, if you want to disagree with anything I've said, or want to talk, or want to give more filling information about any of the ideologies I mentioned, including capitalism, then go ahead and do that in the comments. But I ask you to please be polite and respectful, and being the authoritarian I am, I will reserve the right to delete certain comments that I think are a little bit inappropriate, where I think that maybe it's a little bit past your bedtime and you should calm down and you should step away from the internet. Anyway, thanks for watching.